Shut up and sit down.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast, brought to you by Tacticam. Tacticam is the easiest way to begin filming your hunts, whether it's from the budget-friendly Solo or the 4K Tacticam 5.0. Tacticam has something for all levels of self-filmers. They even have the ability for you crossbow guys or rifle guys to capture your shot through the scope with their film through scope system. So it's basically like a periscope that goes on your scope and attaches to the Tacticam, and everything that you see through the scope is recorded on the Tacticam. This week's episode, we have John Eberhart on the show to talk to you about his 7 strategies for taking nocturnal bucks, among other topics, to boost your confidence as a hunter. John goes through kind of his trials and tribulations, his system. Of course, that does include scent control, and John's a big saddle hunter. But other than that, we get into things like security cover, destination, locations, scrapes, when to be in the woods, and kind of things that John's done over the years that have helped him become successful. John is always a great guy to talk to, and we do appreciate having him on the show. Also, I'm also working with John through a new venture called the Vitals Live, and the Vitals Live is basically live online seminars with some of the biggest names in our hunting realm, and those are given multiple times a week. So far there's been 2 sessions with John Eberhart, and we're doing another live listener viewer Q&A session coming up this Sunday, June 28th. And yesterday, Tuesday, the 23rd, was the first session that was done with Dan Infault, and Dan Infault is doing a map overlay scouting. He's also doing a couple other topic Q&A discussions this week, so if you're listening to this the day that it comes out, you can go to thevitalslive.com and check out the schedule and when you can catch Dan on some of those other ones. Then into July, there's going to be sessions with Gearak, who's the DIY sportsman. He's been on the podcast before, as well as more appearances by John Eberhart, Dan Infault, and some other guys as well. As a thank you to our Patreons, we're going to be giving away a 1-month session subscription to that as a thank you to those who support our show through Patreon. If you're not familiar with Patreon, Patreon's a crowdfunding for creators. So if you like the show and you want to help out with the overhead cost, hosting fees, hunting licenses, all the stuff that goes along with having a podcast, Patreon allows you to do that. You can check that out at patreon.com/Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. As a thank you, besides the Vitals Live giveaway, we also do quarterly giveaways. And what we're doing this quarter is going to come to an end basically as soon as this podcast is done. I'm going to wait a couple days and pull a winner. The podcast this quarter ends, obviously, July 1st starts the new quarter, but I wanted to see if I could get this gift out to the lucky Patreon before that, before the weekend of the 4th, because we're giving away a Traeger 575 Pro pellet grill. That one's got Wi-Fi. I don't have that on mine. It's something that would be really nice to have. And, that's about an $800 grill. And right now we've got 50 Patreons. So if you sign up before basically June 29th, I think I'm going to pull the winner. You'll have a chance to be in there. So it's basically a 1 in 51, 1 in 52 chance, whatever, really good odds to win some great prizes. And so we're giving away that. We're giving away a Tacticam solo package to another Patreon. Base Map is giving away a pro membership along with a swag pack with a hat and a shirt and things like that. And again, you can check that out at patreon.com/Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. And if you're not into Patreon or, anything like that, just please, all that we can ask is that you tell somebody else about the show. That's the best way for us to get in front of new people and to be able to grow the podcast that way. And if you really like what we're doing or you really hate what we're doing, either way, you can go on whatever platform you're listening on and leave us a review. Good, bad, and indifferent. Hit that 1-star, 5-star, whatever you think. type something out, leave a review, and those help us as well, and we do really appreciate that. But I know you guys are going to love this episode. John's always a great guest, and I've been talking to him a lot, so it's a pretty comfortable setting for John and I to have a conversation. So you guys are going to like this. Enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening. Hey everybody, Adam and John back with another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. And on the line, we got a special guest here tonight, someone we've had on the podcast briefly. We've been on another podcast with him as well, but we haven't got to sit down and pick his brain. John Eberhart, the affectionately known godfather of saddle hunting, Michigan public land, big buck killer extraordinaire, bow hunting pressured whitetails, author. What else you got, John? Stop me anytime.
Well, the last 2 years I've sucked. So other than that, I've written three books: Precision Bow Hunting, Whitetails Eberhart Way, Bow Hunting Pressured Whitetails. I've produced an instructional 3 DVD series on bow hunting pressured whitetails, and I've done a lot of writing and seminars and stuff. But other than that, that's pretty well covers it.
All right, and those last 2 years of sucking means that he is actually human, folks. So it's not all roses, even for the big guys.
I haven't even visually seen a buck in Michigan I would shoot during the last 2 seasons. So, and it's kind of weird because typically when I go out of state, I'll see 5 to 15 Pope and young bucks in a 7-day time period. So it's kind of different. Kind of weird.
So in a way, is it humbling, or is something like, do you think something's changed dramatically, or I mean, what do you think the difference is?
Well, didn't you have shoulder surgery also?
No, I absolutely have zero excuses. I just think the properties that I've hunted have not had any bucks that made books, so I haven't had anything to shoot at. I mean, I don't use cameras in Michigan, but the other hunters, I don't hunt any property by myself. There's always 2-3 other hunters, even if it's 20 acres, because it's just free permission properties. So they let other people hunt, and other people have cameras, and I talk to them, and even the other hunters that had cameras out never had a shooter buck what I would shoot on any of their cameras. So you can't kill them if they don't exist. And you know how you guys know better than anybody what Michigan's like. I mean, there's years where there's just no big bucks on the property that you have access to hunt, whether it be public or private.
Well, that's for sure. And that's what I was going to say is, leading into this, that's got to be one of your number one rules, I'd imagine, is you can't kill a big deer if they're not there. So how are you going about, without using cameras here in Michigan, how are you locating, these book class animals?
I never go out and look for the animals, ever. Never, ever have. I've always, during my postseason scouting, I look for sign, I look for scrape areas, I look for congestion points of terrain features, pinch points of transition security cover. I look for destination locations and sign. Apple trees, oak trees, primary scrapes around crop field edges. I'll prep something for that, and then I'll hunt it. If it's in standing corn, as soon as the corn's cut, I won't hunt it because there's no security cover button up to it. So I'm hunting the places where I know if there is a big buck on the property, I will see them, or else one of the other guys will have them on camera, but if there is anything big on the property, I should have an opportunity at it because I'm at the primary destination locations where mature bucks are going to go during pre-rut and during the rut, when they're looking for those ester stows.
And so how does your strategy in that regard differ from, say, every other Tom, Dick, and Harry that's in the woods? Because, I mean, if you had a spot that is that lone apple tree or are those oaks, how are you avoiding other hunters, or how are you, not getting messed up by other hunters in those scenarios on public land or on these properties where there are other hunters, if that's the spot to be?
Well, on public land, it's pretty simple. I have a standing rule whenever I scout public land, and if I can walk to a location, I don't care how much sign is there, I won't set it up. So I will only hunt public land locations where I have to physically cross a river with waders or hip boots or a canoe or a boat or crawl on my hands and knees through brush to get back to some openings or something. So I try to separate myself just by my work ethic and willing to do things that most guys won't on public land. And when you put that into perspective, you have to pretend like everybody's trying to kill you. Everybody on the public land is trying to kill you. Where's the only places you're going to go where you might get up and move during daylight hours? Because all the sign in the world is worthless if it's in a spot that's easy to access. I mean, there may be a big buck visiting it if there's a big buck in the area, but yeah, it's 99.9% odds if he's visiting it, it's after dark during the security of darkness. So by only looking at those remote areas, it immediately eliminates probably 80% of the properties that you don't even have to look at. Because unless you cross something or go back into some area where other hunters typically are not willing to make that work ethic to go to, I just don't go to those places that are easy access. So I immediately eliminate a minimum of 80% of the property by not going to and setting up or scouting areas where other hunters can walk to, standing up in an upright position. I used to get the biggest charge out of that commercial with Michael Waddell, walking down a 2-track with his buddy, and he had a big climber on his back, and, they're going up and they set up in this open timber with no understory, no security cover underneath the canopy, and, they shoot a big buck. And I mean, that is so non-realistic in a pressured, a PA or New York or Virginia or up in the Northeast or Michigan. That's fantasy land. I mean, if you're hunting in a pressured area, you have to have a strategy, and the seasonal and daily timing. The guy, even on private properties I hunt, the other guys, scent control. I have a scent control second to nobody in the country. I never pay attention to wind. And on one property that's private I hunt, the property owner, I'm the only one that he will allow to go hunt in the swamp. Because when you're hunting in a swamp, usually it's going to be during pre-rut or rut, when does are actually up and moving around in the swamp looking for does. He just doesn't trust anybody else not to spook deer off the property, because when you're hunting in a bedding area, you are going to have deer downwind of you, because you're not hunting a specific destination spot. You're going to have deer moving all around you at any point in time during the day. So you have to have pretty much perfect scent control, so deer going downwind of you don't wind you. So I'm the only one he allows in the bedding area. And when I'm hunting other places, I just hunt differently. I hunt with a seasonal and daily timing being correct. Other hunters, they just hunt. I have different entry and exit routes than they do. I make sure I don't spook any. I'm not going to say I don't spook anything. There's no way you can hunt all season without spooking deer with your entries and exits. But the amount of deer I spook is very minimal compared to how most people enter and exit their hunting locations. And that's kind of what I was going to go over, is basically I have 7 strategies, for taking what a lot of people term as nocturnal bucks. And Michigan's a prime example, probably as good as any state, maybe other than PA. Most of our 3.5-year-old and older bucks are pretty much nocturnal until rut phases. I don't believe any buck is totally nocturnal all the time. Excuse me. But in Michigan, they're pretty much nocturnal until the pre-rut, when their testosterone levels kick up and they start, their lower body units take over their brain, and they start looking for, estrus. And they make mistakes. and so I pretty much strategically. That's when I spend the most of my time hunting is during the rut phase. This is just like everybody else, but I'm a big security cover guy. Security cover, security cover, security cover. I can't overstress that. I never ever hunt any location that doesn't have in Michigan. When I go out of state, I de-spec my hunting skills because I don't need to be as detail oriented. But in Michigan, I never hunt a location. I won't even set up a location that doesn't have some form of perimeter security cover around the actual, what I term the kill zone, the destination location. And it has to have some form of transition security cover from a known bedding area. In other words, a big buck is not going to, just get up from a bedding area and move through 200 yards of open timber with no understory, just bare ground underneath it to access a feeding location or a scrape area. He's just not going to make that vulnerable movement. It's just too dangerous. Of the 31 bucks I have in the Michigan record book, 28 of them had been previously wounded. I found either scars on their body where broadheads had passed through them, or bullets. I found slugs in them and buckshot. I found broadheads in quite a few deer. 28 of the 31 had wounds, and one of them carried 4 projectiles. Of the 19 Pope and Young bucks I've shot out of state, not one of them carried any wound from a previous hunter encounter. And the average age group of the deer I've shot out of state is probably considerably older. Most of the bucks I have in the book in Michigan are 3.5 and 4.5 years old. I've shot a lot of bucks out of state that were 5.5 and 6.5 years old. So they're older out there, yet none of them had ever been scathed by another hunter. So there's less hunting pressure. They tolerate a lot more human intrusions. They tolerate a little bit more human odor. They just tolerate stuff.
What are you determining as security cover?
I'm considering security cover is tall weeds, marsh grass, in a swamp with red brush, cattail marshes, autumn olive, hills of autumn olive, or areas where there's just a lot of autumn olive. Any kind of tall vegetation where deer can actually move along or through and basically have a quick exit route. They have to have a mature buck in Michigan, unless he's with a hot doe. I won't hunt a spot unless that deer has a quick exit route, because that's going to make it more conducive for them to go through that area during daylight hours. So it's not going to be like a huckleberry bog, where you got to walk over the top of this stuff. Just some semblance of security cover that once they hop into it, or if they're moving through it, they're very difficult to see, or, as soon as they jump in the tall weeds, they're gone. I remember killing a monster buck in Illinois next to a weed field in December, 2 days after their gun season ended on public land, and the weeds were 10 feet tall. I mean, if I was walking through that weed field and I bumped a deer 3 feet in front of me, I would not be able to tell what it was. They were that dense. And the big buck I shot was skirting the edge of it. He came to a locust tree I was hunting in, and he was skirting the edge of those tall weeds. So within one bound, he's gone. Where if there was any danger, he would literally be gone, as opposed to having to run through 50 or 100 yards of open area, open ground, or open timber where he's very vulnerable. They don't know you got a bow. They don't know what kind of weapon you got. They've just typically deer have been shot at before, and the older bucks, just like us, we tend to be daytime movers. Humans tend to be daytime movers unless you have jobs after dark. So, we move around in the daytime pretty freely, just like deer move around in the nighttime pretty freely, because they're pretty much nighttime movers. But if you take a human and most humans at midnight would feel pretty comfortable walking through a small rural town in any state, really, out in no man's land, walking through it at midnight. Yet most humans would not feel safe walking through inner city Chicago or Detroit in a crime-laden area at midnight. And deer are the same way. As you age, you get smarter, and deer are the same way. So for them to move during the daylight, which is like us moving at night, they have to have some semblance of security cover. They have to feel secure. And they're, on public land, if they moved out through open areas during the daylight on public land, they wouldn't exist. I mean, all of them get killed during gun season. So, obviously they make mistakes, and that's why they do get killed when they're 3 or 4 years old once in a while, when deer do get that old. But very few live to that age. And once they do, they've got a pretty good chance of getting through the season without getting shot, because they're just really, really smart.
So you mentioned you do all your scouting after season or late season. How does that work out?
I do 100. Well, I'm not going to say 100%. I do 95%. That's a safe number of all of my scouting and location preparation during usually February. I'm going to say March and April, because my job, I'm working 100 hours a week in February and January. That's the busiest time of my year. I start running into some slow times in early March and April, so I have some time to do some stuff. But all of my scouting and location preparation and cleaning up my old locations that I've hunted for years or whatever is done typically by the end of April, maybe into May a little bit.
Okay.
So I guess security cover. I have 7 strategies, and I'm going to kind of go through them if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, the first one is the security cover. I won't hunt any place, any location, unless there's adequate security cover around the kill area and adequate transition security cover or exit security cover. The transition cover to a bedding area, or they have to have excellent security cover where they can just bound off and be gone and not have to worry about getting killed. So security cover is a big, big deal. Probably the second thing is natural destination locations. I write a lot about that. And when I say natural destination locations, I'm not talking food plots. I've never hunted over a food plot in my life. Of the 50 bucks I've shot that make books, they've all been killed on public land and knock on doors for free permission properties. So obviously I have no access to plant food plots or hunt over food plots. So I'm looking at, in Michigan, there's a lot of places where you'll find old apple trees, even on public land. I scouted a public land about a month ago, which we videoed for the YouTube video channel I have coming up here. Probably next week it's going to come out. And I found a phenomenal spot butting up to a cattail marsh and a monstrosity area of autumn olive. And there was 2 apple trees, and there was a black cherry tree within 15 yards of it. And I'm going to probably hunt that tree this fall. If those, I'll do a pre-season speed tour to see if they have apples. So apple trees, white oaks would be next as far as mass and fruit, then red oaks, locust trees, which we don't have a lot of those in Michigan. But if I go out of state, I focus on locust trees in December, because the deer love to eat the locust trees when there's snow on the ground, because it's an easy food source. And then obviously scrape areas. Well over half of the bucks I've shot over the last 30 years were at scrape areas. And scrape areas kind of go in conjunction with mast and fruit trees. Typically, if an apple tree is dropping, apples or white oaks are dropping, and there's not a lot of them in the area. Obviously, if you've got a huge area of timber and it's scattered with white oaks and red oaks, there's not going to be much for scrape areas, because there's no specific destination spot where the does converge in a small area. They can just basically browse throughout the whole timber, so there's no defined destination spot. But if you just got a couple oak trees and everything else is, cherries and maples and beech trees and popples and whatever, that's going to be a natural destination spot. And typically, because those are where does feed, and all buck activity during the rut phases revolves around doe activity, that's where the mature bucks and even the subordinate bucks, once the scrapes are made, will come in and check. So natural destinations for food, because the food attracts the does and these are isolated spots, so they're kind of small. So deer have to come to them at the destination location. But those little tiny small spots where does feed is where the bucks are going to put their scrapes, and they're going to rub around the area because it's a doe spot. And in those, seasonal daily timing goes with that. As soon as you prep something like that, you obviously have to come back. I come back during a speed tour just prior to season, and I'll see if the mass trees or the fruit trees or whatever, or the scrape areas are active, and if the trees are actually have master fruit, and if they're dropping. And then because I'm only prepping locations with security cover around it, and because I'm checking these spots after September 20th, which means most of the mature bucks, if there are any, have been rubbed out for at least 2 weeks, because they are typically all rubbed out by September 5th. There's going to be buck sign in the area. There's going to be rubs on the brush, and there's going to be scrapes under the apple trees. So basically, that's destination locations. Destination feeding locations for does, which become destination locations for bucks and where they put their scrapes. And obviously, it's a destination location for a buck, possibly in the first day or 2 or 3 of season, when he may still potentially be in a summer daytime routine. Typically, if it's on public land, because there's so many hunters that hunt public land, just their preseason scouting and preseason location preparation has turned most 3.5-year-old and older bucks nocturnal before season ever even opens. So trying to kill a 3.5-year-old or older buck in a state like Michigan or PA or New York, on the first 2 or 3 days of season is pretty close to zero. It's really difficult because they're just nocturnal before that. So first is security cover. Second is I focus my attention on natural destination locations. And something else on the natural destination locations, a lot of people will set up apple trees or white oaks, and if they're out in the timber, they hunt them whenever. They'll hunt them in the mornings, and they'll hunt them in the evenings, and that's a big no-no. When you hunt an apple tree in the morning, you're going to spook deer at it with your entry, because there's almost always going to be deer feeding at it, because it's a primary feeding location. Even if it's in ag areas, they prefer apples over a lot of other stuff. And, they don't sit out and eat hay all night or corn all night. They go around and they'll feed here for an hour and feed there for half an hour. And, there's probably going to be some does there. So, those are strictly evening locations, whether it's during early season or whether it's during the rush phases. So, timing on those trees is very critical, seasonal and daily timing. If you are going out to hunt in the morning, this is my number 3 strategy, and I've had a lot of emails on this over the last 20 years since my first book came out, because I wrote about this quite a bit, is being on stand super early. When I say super early, I'm always on stand and settled in and quiet an hour and a half before daylight on morning hunts. I'm usually getting out of my vehicle 2 hours before daylight. I've got spots I hunt in southern Michigan, 2.5 hours from my house, and I get up at 1 o'clock to drive down there and go hunting. Because mature bucks tend to, about half an hour to 40 minutes to an hour before daylight, they will start to transition out of ag if it's in an ag area, or if it's on a ridge with oak trees, they'll start to transition out of that before daylight and get back down into some heavier security cover, because obviously the ag and the open timber where there may be oaks, it's just too open and vulnerable for them to be in the daylight. So they'll start transitioning. So I want to make sure I'm in my location well before they start to make that transition and I'm quiet. Otherwise, with a typical 15-minute or half hour before daylight entry, I'm going to spook the very deer I'm trying to hunt with my entry, and I'm not going to know it, because they're going to hear me coming from a distance and they're just going to scoot away. I'll never know I spooked them. And I've had many hunters tell me that one tip changed their success. I had a guy from Ohio 15 years ago. He said, man, that was the big thing I was missing. I was going into the stand of oaks like a half an hour before daylight, and I could hear some rustling ahead of me. and I'd get in my tree, and I'd see some does and fawns and maybe a sport and a buck, but I never see a big buck. And then I read that book, and then he said I picked up on that, and I started getting in my tree, like you said, an hour and a half before daylight and quiet. And he said that very first year he read that book, and I'm not trying to promote the book by any means, I'm just mentioning it. He shot a monster buck, and he said it was so cool because he could hear the deer coming in to these oaks, half hour before daylight. They were transitioning through these oaks back towards the bedding area, and because once they're there and they couldn't hear anything coming in, they felt comfortable eating at the oaks and eating the acorns, because it butted up to the bedding area. So he was right there at the transition route going back to bed, and by him getting there early enough before they got there, he killed one. I never heard from the guy again, but he sent me a picture of that deer. So, getting on stand super early is a big, big deal.
And just real quick, you touched on a little bit of the entry, exit, and timing of hunting, food sources, apple trees, and stuff like that. Are you doing the same thing? When you're talking early morning, are you talking like scrapes? When you're finding that primary scrape area, are you doing morning sits, evening sits?
I'll do both. I'll do both on a scrape area, but I am 100% of the time, if I'm hunting in the morning, I'm on stand an hour and a half before daylight.
Right. I just didn't know if you had a over the history of your, harvest and all of that stuff, if there was a more success in the morning or evening, or you've seen different trends in that.
No, that's a good question, because some areas are very conducive for evening hunts, and some areas are very conducive for morning hunts, and some areas I've hunted have been conducive for both. It's kind of interesting because I've shot 3 bucks in Michigan that made book in the first 2 days of bow season, and all 3 of them were in the morning, and all 3 of them I rattled in. All 3 of them, 2 of them I heard. I was in a bedding area. I physically heard bucks sparring, and both of them were actually one of them was about probably a half hour after daylight, so it was probably 7:40. And as soon as they stopped sparring, they weren't fighting; they were just sparring. And I had no clue what they were. I could just hear 2 bucks sparring. I rattled, and a big 8-point came in, and I shot him. And that was in the 70s, late 70s. That was early 80s. I take that back. And then in 1999, I was in a transition zone I was right on the edge of a bedding area in some oaks, transition area going into a bedding area. And about 8 o'clock, I could see 2 legs walking under some trees about 100 yards, 80 to 100 yards away, 2 sets of legs, and I had no clue what they were. And I did a subtle sparring sequence, and they turned and they started coming towards me, and they got about 40 yards, and I could see some glimpses of antlers now, so I know they're bucks. But they lost interest after they moved that 40 or 60 yards. They lost interest. They started eating some acorns, and then they turned and started going back towards the bedding area, which is just another 50, 60 yards away to the east. So they were too close for me to use a rattle sequence again, because a rattle sequence, requires taking, 10 or 15 seconds. And obviously they would key me in being 25 feet up in a tree if I'm doing it for 15 seconds. So I carry an inhale and an exhale grunt call, and I took out the inhale grunt call and turned around, and it was a typical morning. It was dead quiet. And I just did a really soft inhale grunt, and they both came right over. One was an 8, one was a 10, and I shot 10 point. And then, the other one was in the bedding area where I heard, again, that was at 8 o'clock, and I heard 2 bucks sparring. Couldn't see them. They were 150 yards away. And as soon as they stopped, I did a rattle sequence, and a 10 point came over. Probably the bigger of the 2 came over, and I got a 14-yard shot at him. So I've had better luck early season in the mornings for some odd reason, at least tactics-wise. But I think during the rut phases, I've probably had my highest success rate. Not probably, I have, because I've got the stats, during midday. So from 11 o'clock until 3, I've shot 21 bucks that make book in Michigan between November 1st and November 14th. And of those 21 bucks, 7 of them were shot between 11 o'clock a.m. and 3 p.m., middle of the day. And so that's exactly 33% were shot during midday, while less than 8% of my time spent on stand during those 14 days was between 11 and 3. So most of, a good percentage of my hunts, I just hunted mornings or evenings. There wasn't a lot of all-day sits where I hunted through midday, but yet I still killed 33% of the bucks during midday, while less than 8% of my time spent on stand was between 11 and 3 o'clock.
And not, it's hard to, at least for me hearing this, to take into account, other hunters, recollections or seeing their pictures or anything like that. But, that's like kind of like the hardest thing for me to digest through all of this is like, if you're getting up at 1 a.m, going to do an all day sit on an area where you're just saying, well, I'm pretty sure that there's going to be a good buck. If there's one in there, he's going to be here. That's a lot of confidence in your spots. And like I said, you may have, seen a bunch of deer throughout the year or whatever that's put you into that. But I mean, that's the one thing that I'm thinking about here. Like that's some real confidence, stick-to-itiveness. I don't know.
Well, I've had a lot of confidence. I had a lot of confidence in every spot I hunted the last 2 seasons in Michigan, and I didn't kill anything.
Yeah.
I always go to a spot with a lot of confidence. I'm a pretty confident guy. I'm a pretty upbeat guy, and so I'm pretty confident in my spots. I'm very specific on having a plan for every hunt. I'll probably have 40 trees prepped. I'll probably only, during the course of the season, I'll probably only hunt 12 of them, and I have a plan for all of them. Some of my spots are early season spots, some are morning spots, some are pre-rut spots, some are evening spots, some are midday spots. And when I used to go out of state by myself, I always take my kids with me now. But I used to go by myself all the time, and sleep deprivation was a major issue. And there were hunts where I would literally sleep in until 9 and 10 o'clock because I was just too tired. And I would always prep 1 or 2 when I scouted the first day or 2 and prep locations. I always prepped 1 or 2 midday locations, and a midday location would be like a transition route with excellent security cover between 2 bedding areas, where a buck would maybe go in and scent check this bedding area and then take the best available transition security cover route to the next bedding area to check that bedding area for does. So that would be a midday spot because I wouldn't have to worry about spooking deer with my entry because it's in the transition route. I'm not physically going into the bedding area to mess it up. Because when I hunt bedding areas, it's all day sets. Because otherwise you'd spook deer with your exits when you get down in the morning, or you'd spook deer with your evening entries. So I always have, and I don't have a lot of them because I don't hunt a lot of full day hunts anymore. But I always have 1 or 2 midday locations where I can sleep in until 8:30 or 8 o'clock, and then get on stand by 10.
And I don't want to take you away from the principles. We can get back to those here.
That's fine.
In just a second, but we've got a lot of hunters, and I don't know. I think it's just because I was excited to get in and get into the nuts and bolts of talking to you. But we've got a lot of hunters that are East Coast hunters that are pressured state hunters and things like that. And we've got a lot of new hunters that are, either trying to kill their first buck with a bow, trying to kill their first deer with the bow, or trying to take their hunting. Everybody's trying to get better and trying to improve. But that confidence thing is one thing that's kind of, after decades and, shooting some deer. And, I say tongue in cheek that I'm the world's worst bow hunter, because of all the things that go wrong, and how do you, I guess, where would you point somebody to help them to start to build that confidence, because we all have those sits where things just go terribly wrong. And, you're saying that, the last 2 years, there just hasn't been a deer that you wanted to kill, or that's been in the class that you're, striving to take. How would you impart like that confidence upon, these hunters that are trying to work through it? And it's like, every time I go out, there's somebody there, something's wrong, or, because there are a million excuses that you can come up with, or, reasons why it didn't go right. But how do you keep that positive mindset, or what advice would you have for them?
There's a couple things there. When I go sit on any location, I try to sit in locations where I'm not going to see a lot of deer. Typically, the locations I'm in, I'm not going to see a lot of deer because I don't have a big visual. I never hunt field edges, crop, unless it's a standing cornfield. I never hunt anything beans, thick corn, hay, anything short crops. I never hunt edges of those ever in Michigan because bucks just aren't going to come out into those that I want to kill during daylight hours. So, but when I do go hunting, I don't always have expectations of seeing deer. I'm just aware that to kill the deer that I want to kill, I'm going to have a lot of empty sets. So I never get down on myself. It's just, you put in your time and you do the best you can and you hope for the best. But the thing you said about the public land hunters goes right back to what I said. If you are a public land hunter, I got a phenomenal example for you, Adam. We filmed a video for the YouTube channel about a month and a half ago, and it was on public land down in the Gregory area. And I was shocked. I'd never been on this property before in my life. And there was, I don't know what the date is where you have to have your tree stands out of trees, and if you don't, anybody can take them and they're theirs. There is a date, a cutoff date. But anyway, it was in March, late March or early April. And there was 8 stands that we saw in a 200-yard area, 200 by 200-yard area in wide open timber with absolutely no security undercover. So, if people are going to hunt, and I can't knock people for not knowing because people just don't know. If you don't know, you just don't know. But you need to learn. If you're going to hunt heavily pressured property, you just have to learn to go back to the areas where there's some security cover. It was also very interesting when we walked through that property. We found one rub in the timber on a small sapling. Both edges we went down, both edges of this woods, probably 200, 250 yards wide. One edge was a swamp and one edge was a cattail marsh with a river going through it. Both edges were lined with buck rubs, and there wasn't one stand along the edges next to the security cover. So people have to they just have to learn by mistakes like I did. I didn't have a mentor. Nobody in my family hunted. None of my relatives hunted. I learned totally 100% on my own, and you have to make mistakes, but you have to learn. But you can't keep doing the same things and hunting the same way and expecting better results. You can't hunt public land where there's other people's stands in the same general vicinity and expect to kill big bucks, unless you just feel like you're luckier than they are. You have to go places where other hunters are not willing to go. Now, if you're happy shooting does or a 1.5-year-old buck, which you very well might be able to do in an open timber area like that, because they're not, they're just not as leery as a big buck, well, then that's fine. And that's, I have nothing against somebody if they want to shoot a 4-pointer or a 6-point. That's great. If that makes them happy, I'm all for it. But they just need to not watch TV, because the TV guys hunt stuff like that and kill big bucks all the time, but they're hunting in a zoo. They're literally hunting in a zoo-like setting, and you can't compare what you do to what they do. The Drurys and the Kiskies and the Lee and Tiffany's, they have 150-inch bucks walk by them, and they don't shoot them because they're not big enough. I mean, that's a zoo setting. Anybody could kill bucks in a place like that. And they're hunting open areas, so because they're hunting open areas and field edges, hunters that watch their shows think that they can do that and have similar results, and that's not the reality of hunting. It's like sports icons. You look at Phil Mickelson, or you look at LeBron James or Tom Brady, Tiger Woods. Those guys all competed against other golfers, basketball players, Michael Phelps swimmers, their whole life, through middle school, through high school, and then they got maybe they went to college, and then they got drafted into the pros. But the one thing and then they out-competed all the people in the pros, but the one thing that made him a sports icon is they competed against all their competition on the exact same fields, the same basketball course, the same swimming pool. So they were physically better. They deserve to be sports icons. TV guys don't compete against anybody. They have zero competition. That's just a flat fact. And they have many, many mature bucks on their property. So they have no competition. And for people to assume that they can hunt in that same manner and kill big bucks, it's not going to happen if you live in Michigan or PA or New York or in the Northeast. It isn't going to happen because that's just not reality. So you have to learn what you have access to, lower your expectations for the area you're hunting, and learn to, if you can take one thing away from this, just focus on being close to security cover. I'm not saying you have to be in the middle of a cattail marsh, but focus to the edges. Stay tight to the edges of security cover and transition security cover or in bedding areas, and get away from where other hunter stands are, and you'll have a lot better success. And keep a positive attitude. When I'm hunting, if I see a deer, that's a great hunt. I've had my share. I've done all that stuff that you're talking about. I went through all of those regiments where, when I started hunting, if I shot a fawn in the 60s, that was a big deal with a bow. 2% of bow hunters killed a deer with a bow. Now it's 40%. And then I worked my way up to, does, and then I started shooting some, subordinate bucks, and then I worked my way up to only shooting 2.5, and now I'm above that. So you have to progress to get better. I guess that's the best way to. You just can't come out of the box and be good unless you own a lot of property and have a lot of money and buy something and keep everybody off.
Well, I think that's great because, again, there's so many people out there that, with social media and everything.
Yeah, everybody's killing.
Everybody kills a 140. If you didn't kill a 140, well, you better not post a picture of the buck, the first buck that you've ever killed, because you're just going to get shit on by, everybody and their brother because, why would you kill that? Needed another year. Every buck out there needs another year, And
you know what, Adam? That is so cool, and I want to congratulate. I try to do this on every podcast I ever do. I want to congratulate the hunting public because those guys have made it cool to kill deer on public land. They've made it where if you're in Pennsylvania and you kill a 2.5-year-old 8-point with a 14-inch spread that scores 85 inches, you got a stud buck, man, and you should be proud of it. I used to hate working in stores and doing seminars where they got to have guys standing around after a seminar, and they'd pull out their cameras, and one guy'd show me a 130, and other guys, well, that ain't nothing. Here's a 140. I hate that. I absolutely hate that. If somebody's a new hunter and they kill a 6-point, hey, that's phenomenal. I'm not a huge APR guy at all. I get a lot of flack for that, but people pay for hunting licenses and they pay taxes to hunt public land just like everybody else does. And, we don't like the government putting regulations on us for the most part. Most people don't. And so why should we put our demands and our regulations on all the other hunters that buy licenses? Yeah, I live up north. You guys live in a deer hunting area. We see deer all the time. We have a lot of opportunities. Some guy, blue-collar guy from Detroit or Grand Rapids that works in a factory that gets 1 week off a year to go hunting, and he goes hunting and he gets an opportunity to kill a 5-pointer. Hey, more power to him. That may win the buck pool at his little factory. So, I'm not a big guy on this APR. And, I don't care one way or the other, really, but, I don't like anything being force-fed down everybody's throat, just like I don't like the government force-feeding stuff down my throat that I don't like. So I may get some flack for that, but that's okay.
Oh, not here. We're the most vocal on. I mean, I think John and I both would be $1. That would be ideal for our state, and it allows everybody to kill whatever you want.
I 100% agree. I think us being a $2 state it's obviously one of the reasons we are such a poor state for killing big bucks. We are, out of 38 states with whitetails, we're like number 32 as far as P&Y entries per licensed hunters. We are absolutely horrendously terrible. And if we went to a $1, Indiana, for instance, Indiana's a phenomenal example. Indiana used to be a $2 state, and they were number 15 statistically because Indiana's in a lot. Indiana's right between Ohio and Illinois, so it's got phenomenal ground, great soil, great crops, great antler growth per age group of deer, and they were number 15 statistically in P&Y entries per licensed hunters. And about 9 years ago, they went to $1, and now they're number 5. So just by going from $2 to $1, they went up 10 spots in the statistical data for taking P&Ys per licensed hunters.
Yeah, it makes sense.
But it'll never happen. Michigan wants the money, man. Michigan's too worried about, the license money. If I had my way, I'd have them raise the license double the cost of a tag and just limit it to 1. That way they're not changing their income. It's going to be the same. And shoot, if you have to pay $40 for a deer license to hunt 3 months, are you kidding? What a deal.
Right.
John, it's like you've been listening to our podcast because we echo those sentiments exactly.
I think.
My God, $40 is nothing.
Right. I think the.
Good. I've never listened to anybody's podcast. I've done a lot of them, but I have never listened to a podcast.
I think the insurance agents would be pissed off though if we limited it to a 1 tag. To be like, come on, we already have enough deer car accidents. But
well, they can always give out more doe tags.
Right. I'm just being the devil's advocate on that one. But yeah, we definitely feel the same way. $1 tag, we used to hunt Ohio. They're a $1 tag, and so a guy wants to go out and kill a 5-point and he's happy with it. That's great. It's a trophy to him. Perfect. Anyone can go out and get the, meat for their freezer, whatever, and everyone would be happy. Then there'll be some bigger bucks out,
Absolutely. And it makes you think, if you get 1 tag, with 2 tags, somebody's have to shoot, I'll get a little buck for the freezer instead of just shooting a dang doe.
Right.
I'll get a little buck because I got buck tag, and then I'll use my second tag. I've got to shoot something with 4 on the side, and then, then they'll wait, and they may not shoot anything with 4 on the side. But if they just had 1 tag, they're going to be really cautious, and then there's a good chance they might not kill a buck because by the time they say, okay, now I'm just going to shoot any buck,
right,
then they might not get an opportunity. So
yeah, and how many times have you heard where a guy, you got both tags in your pocket, and then a buck comes in with 4 on one side, and they shoot it and tag it with their restricted tag, and then they still have an unlimited tag left, and then it can still go and shoot a spike horn or a 3-point, and now you're taking out it in a backwards order basically.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Happens all the time.
Right.
Yeah. They're just shooting bucks, and they shoot an 8 something with 4 on the side the first tag. That's what they're going to use for their tag.
Yep.
Without a doubt. Yep.
Yep. So like I said, I didn't want to get you off track there, but
well, we went through 4. So the last one was the daily and seasonal timing. For each location, every location should have a daily and seasonal timing that it would best perform for. So that was number 4. 5 is properly preparing locations. I really struggle to comprehend when I see other people's hunting locations how bad they are.
We do the same thing.
Oh my God. The shooting lanes aren't very good, or they're not high enough, or they're totally exposed on the side of a tree, and it's just I'm like, how could you even get a shot out of that tree? It just blows my mind. They don't have the proper shooting lanes, and they don't get high enough, and I think that has a lot to do with most people prep their locations during preseason when there's foliage on everything. And if you're prepping, that's one cool thing about postseason scouting and location preparation, because I focus most of my locations around the rut phases when the foliage is down. So obviously during postseason, when I'm looking at my locations and I'm looking at the trees I want to set up in, I'm looking at them exactly the way they're going to look during the time I'm going to hunt them. So, I'm going to set up a little bit higher because I need to get up out of their peripheral vision. Whereas when I'm prepping locations during preseason and everything's got foliage, I may set something up 18 or 20 feet high. And then when I go back to hunt it in November, I stick out like a sore thumb because now all the foliage is gone. That's another cool thing about postseason scouting also is when you go out and preseason scout and you set up what you think is a rut phase location, everything looks dense. The security cover looks a lot denser because it's got foliage on it. When you're out there during postseason and you're looking at an area, you're looking at it how it's going to look when you hunt it during the rut phases as far as foliage on the brush on the ground. Lots of times in the old years in the 70s, I'd prep a location that looked like, wow, this has got all kinds of brush and stuff. And then I'd get back there in 1st of November and it was just wide open. All the leaves are off what little brush was there that looked thick. And now there's nothing there for security cover.
Right. They're like, so, we're not walking through that anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Without a doubt. Yeah. So properly preparing a location is a big deal. And I always tell people, get up a little bit higher. If it's going to be a rut phase location, get up there 25 feet to your feet so, you're out of their peripheral vision because, you got to let, Michigan, we've got such a huge amount of does and subordinate bucks to every mature buck. So you're always going to have deer go by that you don't want to get picked before the buck before potentially the buck you would shoot comes. Most of the big bucks I've shot in the evenings have been, in the last half hour. And I've always, where you've always had other deer go by prior to that. So, not getting picked is a big deal. The last two things are actually items. They're commercial items that you can purchase. So the first 5 things were actually hunting situations that I strategize on. But the last 2 are commercial items, and the first one is a saddle. I've hunted out of a saddle since 1981, and I can't even begin to tell people how big of a difference that is. There is no question, at least half of the bucks I've shot over the last 40 years, I would not have shot if I were hunting out of anything other than a saddle. That is just a flat-out, straight-up, true statement. Being able to shoot 360, being able to carry my tree stand in my backpack. It rolls up the side a little bit bigger than a softball. I can shoot 360. Nobody's going to steal it. It doesn't make any noise. I can hunt every tree I ever prepped for the rest of my life out with this one little saddle that I'm carrying. I'm not carrying anything cumbersome on my back. When you're freelance hunting, my biggest buck I ever shot was 180 incher. It was a freelance hunt. I just went in cold turkey, found a primary scrape area, never been back there before, and shot a 180-inch buck. And when you're freelancing, typically, because I'm a security cover-oriented guy, and you're carrying a backpack frame on your back, plus your bow, plus your pack, it's hard to beat through the brush, plus your sticks if you're carrying sticks. I'm a tree step guy, but most guys carry sticks. It's just hard to buck brush and get back into the stuff. That's why I also laughed at that Michael Waddell thing, carrying his, climber on his back on a 2-track. That just doesn't happen in the real world. So saddle is a big deal. I can hunt leaning trees. I can hunt big diameter trees. I can hunt tiny diameter trees. It's its own safety climbing harness. With a tree stand, if you're going back and you're freelancing, you have to have a safety climbing harness also, aside from your tree stand, to prep the tree. Something, some form of the safety belt. And with a saddle, it's not only your hunting harness, it's also a safety harness so you can climb and put stuff in with both hands free. So there's just a ton of advantages the saddle has. You can use one of the major advantages of a saddle is you can use the tree as a buffer. You can hide behind the tree. When I set up locations at a destination location, let's say it's at a white oak tree or at a red oak tree or at a scrape area where I know the deer are going to come to a very specific location, typically I'm only going to prep one shooting lane to that spot because that's where they're going to end up coming to. So when I prep the tree, so I'm physically 180 degrees on the back side of the tree from where the deer are going to be at the destination location. Because typically at a master of fruit tree, you're going to have does and fawns and subordinate bucks come in and feed first. The big bucks are always the last ones to come just before dark. So you're going to have other deer there, and they're not there for 30 seconds. It's not a transition zone. It's a destination spot where they're going to be there for 10 or 15 minutes eating apples, looking around and listening. And, if you're sticking out on the side of the tree like you would with a tree stand, if it's a big diameter tree where you can't shoot to the other side of the tree if you're on one side, likelihood of getting picked pretty high. But when you're in a saddle and you're on the totally 180 degrees on the opposite side of the tree and you're just peeking around the corner of the tree, when they leave, if a big buck comes in, just peek around the tree, and when your shot opportunity comes where he's distracted looking someplace else or he's got his head down, you just slightly lean to the side and take the shot. And if deer are transitioning by, and if you're in a transition area or in a bedding area, if you see deer coming by, you can swing around the tree. You move around the tree 360 degrees. Always keep the tree between you and the deer so you don't get picked, even if it's a non-targeted deer you don't want to shoot. So hunting out of a saddle is a big advantage. And then the last thing was I never pay attention to wind because I use activated carbon scent lock clothing. I started using that 1997, and it took me about 3 years to get to learn how to take care of it and use it properly and store it properly. But for the last 20 years, me, my kids, and lots of my friends, we pay zero attention to wind direction, and we never get winded. And I paid attention. I hunted the wind 100% for the first 35 years I hunted. So I know the difference between getting winded and not getting winded. And back when I did hunt the wind, there were areas that I wouldn't even set up locations anymore, because if I did, even if there was a prevailing wind, the currents and thermals and swirling winds from hitting leaves on trees, in corners, you'd always get busted because wind, if there's any foliage on the trees and you're in a corner of something, of an opening, wind will hit those trees, and a small portion of that wind will turn, just like a river bend. Where there's always swirling up, a little swirling pool. Wind will hit those trees. They'll go down the tree line. They'll hit the corner, and then that wind will just start swirling in a circle, and you'll get picked. Sides of ridges, saddles, where you got wind currents, thermals coming down in the morning or up. They're going up in the morning and down in the evening. And when they hit the bottom, they kind of go up, and then they make a swirl. So there was a lot of my best locations I couldn't hunt because the wind was wrong on the days I wanted to hunt it, and there was a lot of locations I just quit setting up because I couldn't hunt them without getting busted. So being able to hunt without paying, just imagine, I don't know if you guys do or not, but just imagine not having to think about the wind, not having to say, okay, which way is the wind blowing, where can I hunt tonight? And, during the rut phases, you don't have that many days off work to hunt. So every opportunity means something. And if you can hunt the best location for that time of season without having to worry about which way the wind's blowing, that's a big, big deal.
Yeah.
I know.
I know this could be like a whole nother podcast. I mean, getting into the scent control stuff, but you'd mentioned, maybe we just touch on a little bit. You said knowing how to take care of it properly, and can you kind of touch on some of the things that you do just to maintain your scent control equipment?
Yep. Yeah, I could easily do an hour and a half podcast on scent control without any problem. Yeah, care instructions are critical. I used to give ScentLock. I'm on ScentLock's pro staff. I bugged them, and I'm such a good proponent of ScentLock for them that they put me on their pro staff. But I used to bug them. I was like, how do you let these TV guys, because these companies used to sponsor a lot of TV shows. They don't do it as much anymore. But all of the guys that Scentlock sponsored on TV shows, they would wear a Scentlock jacket and a pair of Scentlock pants, and that was it. They may wear rubber boots, but they wouldn't have Scentlock gloves on, and I didn't see any of them wear a Scentlock face mask with a drop-down, or a Scentlock head cover with a drop-down face mask. And that's an absolute necessity. That 40% of your odor comes out of your head, hair follicles and your nose and your ears and your mouth. But most of it comes out of your hair follicles. When you wash your hair in the morning, it's oily in the evening, and that's just a ton of bacteria. I shave my armpits even and cut my hair shorter during season. So, a lot of odor comes out of your head, and when you're wearing just some stupid logo hat with your hair hanging out of it, you can wear 20 Scentlock jackets and 20 pairs of Scentlock pants. It's irrelevant. You've got 2 flat tires on a car. 40% of your odor is coming out of your head. So you've got to do it all. Your backpack. Most guys, when they're wearing Scentlock, they don't even think about their backpack. They get into their backpack with their hands 2 or 3 times a day to change out their clothing and their layering garments with their bare hands. And then they put that backpack that they've had for 10 years up in the tree, and they've got all Scentlock on, and they got the head cover on and the gloves on, and they wonder why they get winded. Well, you got a huge human scent wick in the tree with you. Everything has to work in conjunction with each other. So once you learn how to properly care for it, you don't wash it. You only deabsorb it in the dryer, and as soon as it comes out, it's stored in an airtight container. And it stays in that airtight container until you go hunting, and then when you get back from your hunt, you put it back in the airtight container until it needs to be deabsorbed again. Sure. And there's a lot of other things I do, but if either one of you drove your vehicle and I drove behind you and we were going to hunt, and you parked your vehicle and I parked behind you, I would be out of my vehicle ready to go in the woods before you would. That is a 100% guarantee. Unless you wore your clothes while you're driving. If you got to get out of your vehicle and put on your hunting clothes, I will be done before you. I will be out of the vehicle within 3 minutes. Everybody thinks it's, oh man, you stop your vehicle and you got to go through this big process. No, the process is like scouting for deer. 90% of the work in deer hunting is your scouting and location preparation. And then how you hunt is just the end result of all your scouting and location preparation. That's where you put in the work. The other is just the kill part. And, with Scentlock, it's the same way. It's the preparation of getting everything ready and having it in the back of your vehicle, where all you got to do is stop. I jump in the back of my van because I drive a minivan, or, and I just open the tote, put it on, and get out of the vehicle with my bow and go. Put my backpack on and go.
Okay. Yeah, the whole scent control thing is exactly, what you said. You got to have all the pieces and all of the everything in place, much like a hunt in itself, like you said, for scouting and everything. You can't skip one part to get to the other generally. But on that, I want to hear about this. You went through all of your principles and all the things that you do, to, target these spots where these mature animals are going to be, where you need to be. And then you just went and said that you killed your biggest buck on a freelance hunt. So I don't think I've heard that story. I'd like, if you don't mind, to kind of tell us how that went and kind of like the freelancing type mentality, because whether it's your scent control, your speed scouting, your principles, all of that is very regimented. So it doesn't seem like a freelance is a big part.
Yeah, freelance is a fly by the seat of your ass. You're absolutely correct. Right. You're throwing everything up into the air and you're saying, okay, this isn't working. I've got to adjust. So in 1977, I killed my first freelance hunt. I went to a tree. It was a red oak that I had prepared, and it didn't have any acorns. There wasn't any signs. So and that was in Michigan. I just took off through the woods, and I found another oak tree, and it did have acorns. It was a white oak acorn, and this was on public land, and it was budded right up with thick saplings, and I shot a big buck. I could hear a buck in there chasing those after I'd been in the tree a while. And this was just standing on a branch. This was in the 70s. There was no tree stand. He ran this doe out right underneath me, and I grunted. I had to not grunt, but I did, 3 doe blasts before I got him to stop, and then I shot him. But the big one was in Iowa, and I was hunting, and I was there way before daylight. I was going to sit all day. I had a decoy out in this one spot that I had prepared. I had already prepared the place I was going, and I saw about 130-inch 8-point, and out there, I'm not shooting 130-inch 8-point. So that was the only decent buck I saw that morning. But I'm out there in mid-November during Michigan's gun season. I go out. I leave Michigan during gun season because I don't gun hunt. And anyway, I could see a pretty good distance. And about 150 yards away, I could just see there was deer activity. So there was some kind of an open area, and then there was some heavier brush back farther, and I could see deer activity kind of skirting the edge of that brush. And it was pretty consistent. So at 10 o'clock, I got down, I pulled the decoy, put it in the military duffel bag, just kind of hid it for when I come out. And I just really slowly, and I'm in full scent lock because I was hunting. I just really slowly, and it was like 40 degrees, so it wasn't something I was going to overheat by walking. I just slowly kind of transitioned through the woods and looking around, and when I got back into that area, I found a little opening. And that's one thing about primary scrape areas. They are always in openings, 100% of the time. A primary scrape area where there's multiple scrapes in a small zone are in some semblance of an opening. And this opening was probably 20 yards in diameter, and there was 4 scrapes in it. And one of them had just been urinated in very recently. You could see the wet spot, and it had 2 huge clumps of deer droppings that were clumped together, and they were big. The droppings in the clumps were big, so I knew this, and it stunk. The urine was definitely from a buck. You could just smell it. It peed down its tarsals. So I knew this was a place where there was a big buck. It could have been the 8-pointer that I saw in the morning. Who knows? But I knew there was a big buck there coming through. So there was 3 trees there. One of them I really wanted to be in, but I couldn't get up it. It was just too big a diameter, and my rope wouldn't go around it. So I ended up going up this other one that had a pretty severe lean, but it was only 12 yards from the main scrape. There was 4 scrapes. One of them was the scrape. You could just tell this was the active scrape. So I climbed up that tree about 27 feet to my feet, and I wanted to be up the bigger tree because it gave me more cover. This tree was relatively skinny, and I felt like I stuck out because the foliage was down. And I ended up shooting that buck about 45 minutes before dark. And you want to hear the really sad part?
Yeah, what's that?
I almost hate saying this because it's almost unbelievable. I ended up killing him about a half an hour before dark. But I was in that tree. I was probably sitting in the tree and had it prepped and was up in the tree and hunting probably around 12:30, just after noon a little bit. And immediately I had deer starting to transition by me. I mean, just casually marching through. Keep in mind, this is actually going into a little bit of post rut. The peak rut's pretty much almost over. This was like in the 20th of November, and I'm having these deer go by me, and a 4-point and a 5-point went by, and then a nice 8-point went by, and some does and fawns are going by, and there's no rhyme or reason. They're just moving through the area. And then this big buck came, this monster buck, this 180-incher came from a totally different direction. And instead of coming into the scrape, I was prepped to shoot to the scrape, which was to my left, but a little bit around to the front, because I don't like being set up totally to the side of the tree from where my shot's going to be. I like to be a little bit behind the tree with a saddle. So this buck, he's skirting around, and now I can see what he's doing. He's skirting around to get downwind of the scrapes. He's not going to come into the actual scrape. He's going to scent check it from downwind and then move on. That's what I'm guessing he's going to do by the way he's transitioning around the outside of the scrape. So he got it about 35 yards, and I thought he got it about what I thought was 40 yards. So I took my 35-yard pin, which was the longest pin I had, and I thought he was at 40. So I held that 35-yard pin right at the top of his back. And when I let the arrow go, I hit him right below the spine. I hit him between the spine and the lungs. So I hit that little void area that's about maybe 2 inches tall. And I could see the arrow go in because I don't shoot a really fast bow. So I could see everything in slow motion. And that buck turned around and he ran across that same little opening that I was looking across, in the morning. And I seen him run into a big patch of heavy brush, which was about 80 yards. He ran about 80 yards. And I'm like, I wanted to cut my lead strap and commit suicide. That was the biggest buck I'd ever seen in the woods, and I knew I did not kill that deer. And I'm sitting there, and I'm just really upset with myself. And finally, I'm like, John, this is deer hunting. You make mistakes. I had guessed him at 40 yards, and I held high, and he was 35 yards. Everything happened so fast, I didn't have time to rangefind it. And I did have a rangefinder. So I hit exactly where I aimed. So he was 35 yards. So I said, you know what? I saw that big 8-pointer. Maybe there's another big one. I am in Iowa. There's lots of big bucks around here. So I sat and I did a rattle sequence about 40 minutes before dark. And I saw this monster buck come out from exactly the same spot I watched that big one go in. And I thought to myself, I didn't really think to myself. But there was no way I would think that was the same deer. Okay, that didn't even enter my mind. I rattled, did a sparring sequence, and he's coming right at me. He's coming directly on the same exact route that after I shot him, he went into that brush. And when he gets about 50 yards away, I'm like, that's the same damn buck I shot a few hours ago, a couple hours ago. And sure as hell, as he was coming by, he's walking right to the scrape now. He's making a beeline to that 12-yard scrape. I could see the hole where I shot through it. And when he got to that scrape, he started working that scrape, and I shot him at 12 yards, and he ran 40 yards and tipped over.
Jeez.
That's the only time in my life I've ever shot a deer twice in one day. And it was the biggest buck I've ever shot in my life. It was 180-inch 12.
Well, and I think for the listener, there's a lot of things to take away from that because, one of the things that I struggled with, like before, I don't know, I guess getting serious about hunting or whatever, I hunted every chance I could get, and I thought that was, hunting, but it wasn't hunting. It was.
I did that too. I did that too. The more you're out there, the better your odds, and that's not the case.
But to get down and move, so you put in all this time, you were obviously confident in the spot that you were in, and then, you saw that movement and saw like where you needed to be, and rather than say, well, I'm going to hunt there tomorrow or I'm going to hunt there later, you said, I need to be there right now, and making that decision. That's one of the things that I've taken away from a lot of different guys that we've had on the podcast, and just, in my own experience is like, if it's not the right spot, it's not the right spot. So you need to make a decision,
Yeah, you have to be proactive. If you're seeing more activity there than where you're at, and you have the ability to move and take the steps out of your tree, and I had to take the steps out of the tree as I went down, and then I put them in that tree when I went up over there. If you got the ability to be able to do that and do it pretty stealthily, you need to do that. And I was thinking to myself, maybe there was a hot doe that went through there this morning. That's always what you got to think, especially during post rut when most of the does have already been bred. if there's a hot doe, every damn buck in the area is going to try and get her because most of the bucks now are they're out searching for those late ester stows. So all that stuff ran through my mind. There's a reason they're over there, and I need to find out why, because it's not happening where I'm at. So, yeah, you have to adjust. That's the same deal with after you get all your locations prepped and you come up with a seasonal plan, you have to adjust if it's not working. And like the last 2 years, even after I adjusted, nothing worked. So it doesn't always work. And when you're hunting in a state with a lot of pressure, you better expect seasons where you don't kill anything. Those aren't my first 2 seasons. I haven't killed anything. That's just to be expected when you live in an area where there's just not a lot of big bucks. But Iowa and Kansas, that's a different scenario. There could be 5 bucks in those areas that are over 20 on that one little area that's over 125 inches.
Right. Well, one of the questions I ask all of our guests is, what is your bow setup? What bow are you shooting? Sight, arrows?
I am shooting a Halon X, which is a little bit longer. I think it's 36-inch axle to axle. And I'm shooting Carbon Express 250s, or Maxima Reds 250s. And I'm shooting it's at 50 pounds, so I'm not shooting a heavy bow. I shoot a pretty light bow. I shoot a Carter release. I shot fingers until 2 years ago. This is the first 2 years ago I started shooting. And you know what? I haven't shot a buck since I went to a release. Go figure. All the bucks I've shot were with a tab and, with fingers.
Scentlock needs to make a release.
Exactly. Yeah, because I've shot Matthews for years, and I always shot a Matthews Conquest, which was a 41-inch axle to axle. Yep. But I love the Halon X. They sent me, I'm on their pro staff, they sent me a Traverse last year. I did not care for that at all. The Halon X blows that Traverse out of the water, in my opinion. And I've got one of those new ones coming this year. I can't even remember what the name's, CXV or something like that. So, but I like a little bit longer axle to axle bow. I'm sorry?
I'd say probably that VXR.
Yes. Yep. I've got a new one of those coming in 50 pounds. I used to shoot at 60 pounds. I've never shot over 60. And, but when I shot 60, I was shooting mechanicals. But since I went down to 50 pounds, I just don't feel like I've got the energy to lose any energy opening up a mechanical, because most of the mechanicals, when I shot them, were deployed from the front. They were 1.5-inch cut sidewinders was what I used by rocket. And I figured I probably lost 20 to 25% of my energy opening up the blades because they deployed from front to rear. Now there's some pretty good ones. I know Ramcat makes a good one that deploys rear to, just from the back. As soon as it hits anything, the blades pop out and lock into place. So I'll probably shoot those. But the last 2 years, I shot G5 Strikers, which is a fixed blade 1.1-inch cut. And in 2008, when I had shoulder surgery, Matthews made me a 40-pound fingers bow, and I shot that big 12-point at 35 pounds with a Maxima 150 and a G5 Striker 1.1-inch cut. And that deer only went 80 yards. Sweet. So, it's these guys, and I worked at Jay's. I was an archery buyer at Jay's for 5 years back in the 70s. And, it's not the velocity, it's the accuracy. These guys that shoot these 70 and these big, heavy bows and struggle to get them back, I don't get it. Because with today's technology and velocity of arrows and speed, that's just totally not needed.
Yeah, especially for the whitetail.
Say you're sitting here talking to John, you commented earlier before the podcast on how big of a guy he is. I mean, we're looking at a 60, an 80, and a 70 right there. And, he says, well, I like to shoot 100 yards,
Well, I can remember back in the 70s and 80s when Anderson Archery was around, and they had that big, that bow pull who could shoot the heaviest bow. And back then, a lot of guys shot 80-pound bows. I mean, I don't get it. And I did a DVD in 2005. I mean, it's kind of antiquated now, called Archery Mechanics. And I did it at the second largest bow shop in the country, which is Shootbox Sporting Goods. Not large in square footage, but large as far as amount of bows sold in a year. They're the number 2 in the country. And I had an archery tech guy, and we set up, I'm trying to remember how we did this. And again, this was in 2005, so it's not the technology we have even today. But we took a current bow, I think it was a Bowtech, and it was at 60 pounds, and obviously it was, what's AMO, 30-inch draw or 28-inch draw. It had a 350 grain arrow.
Yep, 30-inch draw.
And we took a 60-pound bow, shot it through a chronograph, and it was not one of the high-velocity bows. It was just this regular standard cam Bowtech bow, and it shot 30 feet per second faster with the same arrow than a 70-pound bow that Brian Schubach had, that was from the late 80s. So, I mean, that was how much technology had changed. Brian had a high-velocity bow for the late 80s at 70 pounds, and the 60-pound bow from 2005 was 30 feet per second faster than his 70-pound bow from the late 80s.
Right.
So velocities of bows are just unreal. To me, if you start getting over 260 feet per second, you almost have to be a bow technician and keep your bow perfectly tuned to shoot a fixed blade broadhead over 1 1/8 inch or 1 1/4 inch cut. And that's kind of why mechanical is one of the reasons they came out, is because people, you know, the bows were getting up into that 280, 300, now they're, you know, 320, 340 feet per second, and they just wouldn't shoot fixed blade heads. It just went playing too bad.
Yeah.
You had to keep it perfectly tuned. So with mechanicals, that wasn't a problem, and they had enough energy to open them up.
Right. Yeah. They're way less forgiving. I mean, Adam was just saying how my new bow that I just got the new PSE Evo NTN, and I got it in 60 pounds. Like, and it's got a 7-inch brace height, and it's super, super forgiving. And I can still shoot 100 yards with it. You know, it's not like I'm going to shoot an animal at 100 yards. I just like stretching it out and, you know, having fun with it. But
I wished I could, John. I used to shoot in leagues, and me and my team won every year we shot in leagues. And I've got a tremor now, and at 35 yards, I just don't feel comfortable shooting over 35 yards, and I really don't like shooting over 25, to be honest with you. My chip shot, my go-to is I try to set my locations up for 15 to 18 yards.
Perfect. And so, John, you've mentioned your books and some, you know, the DVDs and stuff that you've done in the past. What are some of the things you're working on now, and how can people, you know, get a hold of you or follow along with what you're doing?
Well, along with my sons, we've got a new YouTube channel that should be launched this next week. It's going to be called Eberhart's Outdoors, and it's going to be what I always do. It's going to be on instructional bow hunting gear, you know, scouting, just instructional stuff. You know, there may be times in there where we go fishing, but it's primarily going to be based around deer hunting. And I still do whitetail workshops. I've been doing them for 3 years. Basically, I only do those in March and April because I want to do it during postseason. That's when I think people that come to those can take the most away from it. And that's a 2-day event, $600 for 2 days per person. And I limit the amount of people. And basically, the first day we're in the field all day. We visit about 14 preset locations. I have to do it on private ground. I got a farmer that let me do it on his property. Can't do it on public because I'm not going to give away my hunting locations. And also, everybody can't bring waders because they went to any of my locations. They have to wear some stuff. So anyway, we visit about 12 to 14 locations. I explain entry routes, exit routes, seasonal timing, daily timing for each location. You know, how you walk through the field and then make a beeline to the tree line to get into your tree, and then you exit out the swamp area so you don't spook anything with your evening entry or your after dark, exit. And then day 2, and we go over a lot of stuff. Also, we have about a 2 to 3 hour saddle session at the end, and that's just open for whoever wants to stay. We set up saddles. We set up 3 trees close to each other, about 20 inches off the ground, just one step up. And so we have different saddles with one will have a platform, one will have a ring of strap-on steps, and then the other one will have a ring of screw-in steps, and everybody can get up in it and try the saddles, and I show them how to properly use it. And our YouTube videos are going to show all that stuff too. And then day 2 is an all-day seminar at Jay's Sporting Goods, and Jay's Sporting Goods gives everybody a 15% discount for a week. So even if you're out of state, half the guys come are out of state, and they can buy stuff online after they go home if they fly in. So, and Jay's has a really nice seminar room. They got office chairs, padded office chairs, just a really nice. And I've got, I think, 38 of I got 68 bucks in Jay's hanging on the wall. So we can look at those too, and we go for lunch each day, and it's kind of cool. It's kind of fun. So, and that's and also along with you, Adam, we're kind of starting. We did that first Vitals Live thing on Monday, and we're doing another one tomorrow. So that's going to be kind of interesting how that's going to work, because they're going to be interviewing Dan Infault, and hopefully the hunting public, Tom Nelson, the Tethered Boys, Garrett Prawl. They got a lot of people online to do interviews, and that's a membership only deal. But that it's going to be really exciting to me to see how that takes off, because that's kind of new. That's kind of a new technology into the hunting market. It's used in other stuff, but it's the first time anybody's done it on the hunting side.
Yeah, so that's I think you can check that out at thevitalslive.com. And basically, it's an interactive online seminar with all of these, really great informational hunters. And then you've got guys like me that'll be moderating it from time to time, and keeping these guys on topic. So
keeping us honest,
right? But on those, there's opportunities to ask questions, whether it's just typing a question, or you can go on there and I can patch you in, and you can actually ask the question yourself. We did that pretty successfully, I'd say, on the first go around.
And it's going to be kind of interesting because it's a unique format. He's going to, I'm doing another webinar tomorrow. So I did one Monday and tomorrow with Adam as being the moderator. And then on Sunday, a week from Sunday, it's going to be strictly an open Q&A session. So each person, like when Dan comes in, he's going to do the same. He's going to do two live webinars, and then there's going to be a follow-up where it's going to strictly be a Q&A webinar where people can ask questions. And they can see us on, we're on screen while they're watching. So it's kind of live. And last night we showed some maps and some different stuff. So it's different. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's going to be a work in progress. But yeah, it's a really interesting, really fun way to interact. It's one thing to listen on a podcast, and then it's another thing to be in the room and get to have your voice heard, I guess.
Yep.
And then what is your website, John, if people want to check out your books or want to contact you or anything like that?
Yep. Pretty simple. It's Deer, DEER hyphen, which is the little dash, John.net, deer-john.net, or Eberhart's whitetailworkshops.com. But Deer, www.deer. All you got to do is Google my name and it'll pop up. So that's pretty simple to find. And my books are on there, and my DVDs, and all the explanations about signing up for the workshops. I don't have the dates posted yet for the 2021 workshops, but I will probably in the next few months. That's about it.
Well, awesome, John. I think that's kind of all we got for this evening. I mean, I know you and I are going to be talking here quite a bit here coming up in the next few weeks. So, really appreciate you having you on and taking the time for us this evening.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Shut up and sit down.